Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us today for a very special webinar. My name is Varun Shriram. Thrilled to be joined by Bob Seebohar, former Olympic dietitian, really the champion of this training concept, nutrition concept that we call metabolic efficiency training. Bob's going to talk a whole lot about that and how to fuel your endurance event on fewer calories, eliminate that GI distress, avoid the blood sugar roller coaster. We're going to cover it all. Happy to be joined by Bob. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be chatting with everybody and be able to share this information.
We're also lucky to be joined by one of Bob's athletes, fantastic triathlete, professional triathlete, Greg Close, joining us from Brooklyn, New York. Greg, how are you doing today?
Hey, Varun, I'm great. Happy to be here.
Awesome, guys. Well, I want to, before we get this rocking and really dive into the meat of this presentation, just a couple logistical things for everybody in the audience. We're going to spend about the first 30 minutes here really diving deep into metabolic efficiency training, understanding what it is as a concept, how to sort of implement it in your daily diet, in your training nutrition, and really have both Bob and Greg share, some of the real world results that they've both seen. For the next 10 to 15 minutes after that, we're going to dive a little bit into Generation UCAN nutrition, talk about the science behind UCAN and how it really, as a fuel, supports all the concepts of metabolic efficiency training. And then we will leave about the last 10 or 15 minutes or so for questions. We're going to go just about an hour here today. So we're going to try to pack a lot of great information here over the next hour. But before we really start diving into the meat of it, Bob, just from a sports nutrition, sports dietitian standpoint, what's your background in this field, and how did you get involved, working with athletes on fueling?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll be as brief as possible. I kind of devoted my career to sport nutrition, exercise physiology, strength and conditioning, and coaching. Actually studied. I've got 3 degrees, 1 undergrad, 2 master's degrees, all in exercise science, food science, and human nutrition, metabolism. So it was very early on in my life that I kind of picked this career, if you will, because I grew up an athlete, grew up a competitive soccer player, and moved to endurance sports early in college, and just started through the quest of asking the question why and wanting knowledge more about my body. That's what kind of brought me to these studies. And through schooling, I was very intrigued of how the body worked, why the body did certain things, and then turning to an endurance athlete in the mid 1990s, had a lot more questions that I could answer. So I really decided that this was it. This was my career. I'm going to spend a lot of time with this. I'm going to start answering the questions that nobody had answers for in terms of why am I getting GI distress? I mean, I remember my Ironman days where I thought it was a rite of passage to have GI distress because that's what everyone said. You dump a lot of sugar in your gut, you get GI distress, and welcome, and hopefully you finish, right? So it's been an evolving process for sure. I definitely think of myself a little bit more as that salmon swimming upstream, if you will. I kind of go against a lot of the norms, and it's mostly because not my attitude necessarily, but because I want to answer the question why for a lot of different people, including myself. So it's been a roundabout way of me getting to where I am today, and developed a few great concepts in terms of the sport nutrition with nutrition periodization and metabolic efficiency. So from there, growing up an athlete, it's just kind of taken my career one step at a time.
Fantastic, Bob. And then, Greg, how about you? What brought you into this world of triathlon? You're both an athlete and a coach. You've studied this metabolic efficiency training concept under Bob. What brought you into the world of triathlon?
Yeah, so I was a rower in college and then graduate school. Like Bob, I also have a master's, but unlike Bob, mine is not helpful at all. I have a master's in political science. So I had a lot of questions and didn't have any answers to them. So as I got into triathlon after my rowing days were over, I started doing a lot of the long course racing and found myself with a lot of those rites of passage, as Bob would say, the GI distress, spiking energy levels, plummeting energy levels, falling, having 6, 7, 8 good hours in an Ironman, but needing 9 or 10 and just not having it. So I started doing all the research I could, looking around everywhere, just, everything from Triathlete magazine to different websites to whatever I could get my hands on. And thankfully, just out of luck, I ran into Bob I guess it was 2009 now at a USAT coaches certification clinic out in Colorado. And Bob gave a continuing ed course on metabolic efficiency. I thought it sounded amazing, but was highly skeptical that something seemingly so simple and straightforward could be as effective as it was, given my kind of high calorie approach to racing and training. And spent a couple more years doing it the wrong way, and then returned to Bob in 2013 and signed on with him as my head coach, and have been doing metabolic efficiency now for about 2 years, with UCAN as a staple of my training and racing diet.
And most recently, for Greg at the Eagle Man 70.3 a couple weeks ago, Greg, you finished 7th overall, brutally hot day, tough conditions out there, but 4:14:38, I believe, was your finishing time, and you did that on just 440 calories total. So for those of you doing the quick math in your head, we're really looking at right in that 100 calories per hour range for a very impressive finish time at a 70.3. If that does kind of trigger really in your head, it should. And with that, Bob, one of the things you mentioned is really talking about challenging the traditional approach, or at least questioning it. Not challenging it for the sake of challenging it, but really questioning it and saying, is there a better way? So, what's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish here today?
Yeah, it's funny because I look back at what I studied, and not saying anything is wrong, but what I like to challenge people in academia and non-academia is just to say, things change, biology changes, research changes, nutrition changes, training adaptations change. So have an open mind for sure, because certainly what I learned 15, 20 years ago in school, I'm not going to say is wrong, because it wasn't wrong. We just have much better ways and much better understandings of how the body works nowadays. So I do want to have fun talking about this new school versus old school sport nutrition, because I did come from the old school, and I think I'm one of the many few that has actually adopted the new school approach, and has had kind of the courage to step up and ask those questions why. But jokingly, as you can see on the slides, I like to blow people's mind. I like to knock your socks off, because really, what I'm going to tell you today, if you've not heard this before, it's new, and it is somewhat unbelievable. And that's why I'm really glad Greg is here too, because I can talk about it, and I've done it myself. And it sometimes takes the naysayers to step up and say, well, what about the professional athlete? Because I get that all the time. Well, great, it works great for age groupers or high age groupers, recreationally fit individuals, but what about those pros? It can't work for the pros. Those guys and girls are going too fast. So I'm really happy Greg is here to provide his inputs. And at the end of the day, end of this webinar, I just want you to think differently. Whether you believe what I'm saying or not is really not the case, but I do want you to start questioning things, and I want you to start thinking differently about your daily nutrition approaches, but also your nutrient timing nutrition approaches. What products are you dumping in your body? Is it simple sugar based, or is it more UCAN based? So I think by the end of this, I just want to have a paradigm shift that you can think in your head to ask, to have you ask the questions like I asked, a few years ago.
Fantastic. So that's no better place to start than right there. So I think with with anything, when we're talking about changing the approach, for a lot of people, there's got to be a reason why, right? So what are the challenges with performance that a lot of athletes face?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you straight up, and again, I am a competitive triathlete. Used to be an ultra runner, a few years ago. Do competitive cyclocross now. So I'm living that life. I'm nowhere near Greg's ability, which I think is great to get his input. But I have to say this: the biggest concern I have with people is they're reading the magazines, they're reading these internet articles, they're even going back to old school. They're not continuing their education in terms of the ever-changing field of sport nutrition. Because whenever I put this up and ask the question, what is the nutrition limiter to performance, some people get it, some people don't, but it really is. If you're going to say, what is going to slow me down, it is the depletion of glycogen. You cannot argue that. And you know, these days, you know, I guess 10, 15 years ago, we could have argued hydration, but nowadays there's a huge argument to that, and we're not going to get into that in this talk. But really, everyone is in agreement that what slows you down and makes you stop is the depletion of carbohydrate stores in your body. So we have to think about this and strategically, and remember this, if you don't know this already, the typical person has anywhere between about 1,400 to 2,000 calories worth of carbohydrates stored in their body, in their muscles, in their liver, and a little bit in the blood. So we look at that, and that's enough calories, enough energy, if you will, from carbs to satisfy about 2 to 3 hours worth of moderate intense exercise. So I could go for a 2-hour bike ride, and I can be energized. I can have as many carbohydrates as I need to fuel that exercise. But what happens when intensity starts to increase, or what happens if duration starts to elongate a little bit? So what we're trying to do is get away from the model of saying, if we know performance, the limiter to performance in terms of nutrition is glycogen depletion, we don't necessarily have to do what we did about a decade ago and shove as many simple sugars into our body per hour as it could handle. We just don't need to do it. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of people out there that believe that. And that's the paradigm shift that we're trying to create these days. So yes, we have glycogen depletion, but through metabolic efficiency, we can actually teach our body to preserve those carbohydrate stores, those glycogen stores, so we can actually utilize fat better as energy, but have those carbohydrate stores when we really need them. So what I should say, and you can see from the slide, is coming into this metabolic efficiency, it's very simple. As a coach, I teach athletes how to be more efficient in swimming, in biking, in running, in transitions, right? But as a sport dietitian, from a nutrition perspective, I'm trying to improve their efficiency in utilizing the nutrients that they already have in their body. So this isn't, you can call it special, but it's not new, right? What we're trying to do here is we're trying to teach the body to tap into those almost unlimited stores of fat and preserve carbohydrate at the same time. If you can do that, and yes, you can train the body to do just about anything in a normal state, right? If you can do that, not only is your performance going to be better, but you're going to have better health markers too, and I'll speak about that a little bit through the presentation today.
That's great, Bob. That's a great background on kind of this concept of metabolic efficiency. Now, Greg, one of the things Bob discussed was this idea, in glycogen depletion, where we're relying primarily on carbohydrates for fuel with the traditional approach. When you were coming up as a pro triathlete and really getting into the long course triathlon, what were you hearing? What did you perceive that you needed in order to be able to perform?
Yeah, I mean, everything I heard was the more calories you can get in and keep down, not have come back out of you in some way, the faster you're going to go, the longer you're going to be able to sustain a high effort, and the better you're going to be fueling yourself. So for me, my approach really was that very traditional. As soon as I get out of the water, speaking of an Ironman or a half Ironman, as soon as I'm out of the water, I am putting gels, bars, goos, blocks, powders, whatever it is, into my system at regular intervals and trying to maximize my caloric intake, really with no regard for the type of sugar or the type of fuel that I'm putting in. It's really just what can I put in me that's going to make my calorie count go up and therefore, get me through 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, however long it's going to take.
So what intrigued you about metabolic efficiency training? What made you want to, explore it and look at it as a way of fueling?
It's funny, and it's probably different than a reason a lot of people come to this. But for me, I always said I had an iron stomach and I could handle anything, and I wouldn't be throwing up late in the race. And I could get through it. I'd be really uncomfortable for a couple of days after the race, but that's kind of the price you pay, was my attitude. What brought me to metabolic efficiency, and specifically to Bob and to UCAN, was actually just the ease of use of the product. So if you think of it, if I'm trying to race with 5,000 calories over a 9-hour Ironman, there's a lot of stuff to remember, alarms to set on your watches, things to carry, special needs bags to grab, how many water bottles am I carrying, where am I putting them all, what's the impact on the weight of my bike, and on and on and on. How am I going to carry this stuff on the run? How is it going to impact me carrying 3 pounds of liquid on me in the run? All of these different things. So meeting you, Varun, at Ironman Lake Placid in 2012, and being told I could get by in a race with a bottle here, a bottle there, I could cut the amount of stuff that I had to remember by 95%. That to me, as an elite athlete, was really, really appealing because I just didn't have to think as hard about all the ancillary stuff, and I could just swim and bike and run.
It's a big something, Bob. I've heard you talk about at length. Is with metabolic efficiency, the ability to focus on executing the plan and performance rather than worrying about the nutrition. So, in continuing with some of these limiters, we talked about a limiter to performance. What about a limiter to health, Bob? I mean, there's so many people. The age grouper that really triathlon is, there's a performance element to it, but it's also there's a health mechanism to it as well, that they're doing this sport to achieve better health.
Absolutely. I think it's important for people to understand a couple things. One, we're all aging, right? We all have to fight that biology of aging continuum. And two, as a sport dietitian, yes, I am all about performance and helping athletes achieve optimal performance, but I can't forget about the number one really important marker that we have, and that's our health, right? If you're not healthy, you can't perform, you can't train, you can't compete. So I'd like to bring it back to a lot of athletes and say, the first thing we really need to focus on is health. And what do we focus on first is really managing and controlling blood sugar. If we have a lot of imbalances, and I'll talk about this here soon, if we have a lot of imbalances in our blood sugar, we could have a lot of health consequences, negative health consequences to that, and it's been shown over and over and over again. And even the impaired blood sugar, the super high carbohydrate diet that usually impairs blood sugar quite often, that can lead to various things like metabolic disorders, heart disease, obviously obesity, some arthritis, some types of cancer. So there's actually a host of research that we can pull from that can tell you and prove to you that not controlling blood sugar will negatively impact your health. So that's actually the key thing that I focus on with most individuals and athletes these days. And even someone like Greg, he's young and he's in the peak of his career, but he's at a certain point, 6, 7, 8 years from now, we're going to be talking about the extension of his career. So how do we do that? We have to focus back on health again. So that should always be the primary marker for people.
And not to take this too much on a tangent, Bob, but I mean, with health, oftentimes, and you've seen, putting high-level athletes in the lab with you, oftentimes somebody that looks fit and healthy per se on the outside isn't necessarily healthy on the inside, right?
Absolutely, and just because you look it doesn't mean you are it, right? And I'm a walking example of that, and I'll give you my case study later in this presentation. But it's a perception until you do what I call popping the hood, until you get some blood work done, until you get some metabolic efficiency done, sweat testing, anything just to peek inside your body, until you have a better understanding what's really going on inside. It really doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, because perception is not sometimes reality for most people. So it is very important to have a better understanding of what is happening inside my body. Go to your doctor, go to the performance center, get some testing done to truly understand the health component to the performance athlete that you are.
So as we talk about what triathletes or endurance athletes are primarily relying on for fuel, what's the impact of the traditional carbohydrate, simple sugar-based approach to fueling?
Yeah, I love sharing this because been there, done that, right? I've been an athlete my whole life. This is my 20th year as an endurance athlete, and I just remember, I was that pasta guy. I'm Italian. I grew up Italian. I grew up with pasta, and I love those meals. It's funny because I look at it now, and every time I would eat pasta in the past, or just any high carbohydrate load, my stomach would give in a little bit. It felt a little queasy, but the typical endurance athlete will consume roughly 50% or more of their calories from carbohydrates. And unfortunately, times are changing now, but very slowly. Unfortunately, there's still the processed, the refined, the white carbohydrates, the pastas, the rices, the breads that are not really whole grain based, so they don't have a lot of nutrients in them. But what we need to understand is when you have a high carbohydrate diet, we need to remember that there are two other key macronutrients, protein and fat. When carbs are high, that means something else is low to moderate, and that's usually protein and fat. Unfortunately, in this whole biochemistry realm, if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, your body is actually attuned to burn a lot of carbohydrates, right? And that's basic biochemistry 101. So the more carbs you eat, the more carbs you burn. The more carbs you burn, the more you have to eat, not only during the day, but on the bike, on the run, during training, right? So you're actually teaching your body to be more of what we call sugar dependent when you have a high carbohydrate diet. what happens then physiologically is, you can see that blue line on the lower left part of your slide, what happens is your blood sugar gets affected quite significantly from that. So when you are eating a higher diet consisting of carbohydrate and a little bit less protein and fat, your blood sugar goes on this what we call a roller coaster, right? So it goes up and it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So what happens is your body is very good at saying, if my blood sugar is high, if I just ate a bowl of pasta, my blood sugar is going to climb. Your body says, I can take care of that. I'm going to knock on the door of this organ, and you can see the organ on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. It's called your pancreas. And your pancreas has a couple different functions, and one of them is to secrete insulin. Insulin takes care of that high blood sugar in your body. So obviously you don't want to be walking around with high blood sugar because it can lead to a host of disease states. So insulin comes on in, and insulin says, all right, I'll do my job. I'll make sure blood sugar gets back into your cells. We'll be very, very hunky-dory, and we'll live life comfortably again. However, that happens over and over and over again in a high carbohydrate diet. Eventually your body may dispose itself to what's called insulin resistance. So your pancreas can only be worked and overworked so much before it says, I'm done. I cannot release enough insulin as much as it takes to get this blood sugar down. So from a health perspective, it's pretty negative. The more carbs you eat on a consistent basis, the more you're going to overwork your pancreas. Why is insulin resistance important? Because that can predispose you to disease states, and that's the health, right? From a performance standpoint, and even a health standpoint, if you have high blood sugar, again, biochemistry 101, you can even look this up if you'd like, because I did this 9 years ago, and off on a tangent, metabolic efficiency is celebrating its 9th year in existence, right? So it's still kind of funny to me how many people don't know about this, but off the tangent, when your blood sugar is high, your body, through a cascade of events and enzymes and reactions in your body, it actually blunts the fat-burning response in your body. So if blood sugar is high and insulin is high, that's going to turn off or significantly reduce your body's ability to burn fat. If your body's not burning fat, it's burning carbohydrates. So that's where I said earlier, you can teach your body, and I tell athletes this all the time. I said, hey, if you want to teach your body to burn more carbs, shove as many simple sugars in your body as possible, and good luck with that, right? If you want to teach it to burn more fat, what we have to do is control our macronutrients. We need to make sure we're gonna balance our carbs, our protein, and fat. And it's really, at the end of the day, guys and girls, it's about controlling your blood sugar through food. That's what we're talking about. That's daily nutrition. The sport nutrition part of this is, what products should I be using before, during, and after that will actually support my metabolically efficient state that I'm doing every day. So that's kind of the quick synopsis of this whole nutrition roller coaster that we speak of.
And so, Bob, from a sports nutrition standpoint, which we'll get into here in a little bit, things like your simple sugar-based gels, chews, drink mixes, sort of independent of the brand. Most of these are simple carbohydrates that are going to cause these ups and downs in blood sugar and put you more in that carbohydrate burning mode. But what about from foods? I kind of call these I guess triathlete foods or runner foods. But what are kind of the typical things that people think from a dietary standpoint, they should be eating before a workout, or they should be eating to support high training, that's actually putting you in this blood sugar roller coaster?
Yeah, and the typical is what I grew up with too. It's have a bagel, a white. I remember this. Have the plainest, the whitest bagel you can, because that's going to give you immediate energy. And yes, it does. But here's what people don't understand. Like banana is a great example in the triathlon world. How many of us eat bananas? And I'm not saying a banana is bad, but by itself, it's going to induce a high blood sugar response, which means it's turning off your fat burning response, right? So in the triathlon world, we need to understand a few things that a lot of companies don't like to educate their consumers, their clients about, right? The first thing is, if you eat a lot of carbohydrate before a workout or a race, you're blunting your fat burning response. Now, that is the most ridiculous thing you can ever do, especially when you're talking about long course anything. It could be marathon, it could be half Ironman, whatever, right? If you go into a race blunting your fat burning response, and the race is going to take you longer than 2 hours, you're not improving your body's ability to get through that session or that race in a positive way, right? So The first thing is you don't have to have that gel 5 or 10 minutes right before a race or before a workout. All it's going to do, it's going to spike your blood sugar. It's going to cause you to burn more sugar. And I don't know if you guys are following along here, but remember what I said earlier in one of the first slides. What reduces or significantly impacts your performance from a nutrition perspective? It's glycogen depletion. The sooner you turn on your carbohydrate burning, the faster you're accelerating glycogen depletion. Think about it. It makes sense, and it's biochemistry 101, right? So what we want to try and do is produce a blood sugar controlling response before a race, before a training session. So from a food standpoint, really what we're talking about is combining carbohydrate in terms of fiber-rich foods, protein, and fats. If you can combine a food or a food that has all three of those in there in the period before training, before race, you're going to set yourself up very nicely for a fat burning opportunity rather than accelerating carbohydrate burning.
So makes perfect sense, Bob. And you know, while we're going to start by diving into the daily nutrition aspect of it, but kind of as at a macro level, the overall strategies. What are things that you know, people should understand and know about metabolic efficiency?
Yeah, it's, you know, first and foremost, and here's where we need to start. So I developed this concept before metabolic efficiency. It's called nutrition periodization. So every athlete goes through some type of physical periodization, whether or not they have a coach or not. You know, endurance athletes go through base training, they go through a build cycle or a competition cycle, and we go through an off season or a transition cycle. So with your energy expenditure, with your physical goals, you know, sometimes you've got low volume, high intensity, low intensity, high volume, moderate of both, right? Your hours per week are changing. What we need to realize is step back and say, nutrition must support your physical periodization, your physical training. So that's the entire nutrition periodization concept where, you know, if you're in off season, maybe you don't need to eat the high amount of volume of food that you did in the competition season. And just like right now, I mean, most of us are in competition, so you know, the volume of food needs to be a little bit more strategic to support the energy expenditure. So that's the most simple thing. The second thing is it relies on metabolic efficiency, and I get this all the time, and it cracks me up sometimes, and it bothers me at the other time. But it's, you know, being metabolically efficient is just about teaching your body how to use fat and use carbohydrate better. You don't need to follow a low-carb diet. Is it one of the methods of developing metabolic efficiency? Yes, but there are 5 different dietary strategies that I've identified to date that can improve your body's ability to use fats at higher intensity of exercise and preserve carbohydrate, but you don't have to go crazy. Like if you want to do low carb, so be it. I haven't met many triathletes who are very successful on a significantly low carb diet, but here's the thing, there's no definition of low carb diet, right? Low carb can be, you know, if I eat 400 grams of carbs a day and then I go to 300 grams, that's not a low carb diet, but it's lower for me. So I think people need to understand, 1, metabolic efficiency is not a low carb diet. 2, there is no real recommendation for a low carb diet. And 3, the only low carb that we really have a definition for is nutritional ketosis. And that's not something that I like endurance athletes to be in, to be honest with you, because it is really tough for them to pull that off with their volume and intensity of training.
Absolutely. So as we talk about the 5 different strategies, Bob, why don't you outline these, and then I'm going to pull Greg in and talk about which one of these he's implementing from a dietary standpoint. But what are the 5 different strategies from a daily nutrition standpoint that people can you know, think about when it comes to metabolic efficiency?
Yeah, and remember again, I mean, I'm trying to do this, you know, from a food first model. So it's really talking about carbohydrate or fiber, protein, and fat, right? So looking at that macronutrient status and looking at foods differently and how to put foods together, that's the real goal of this, to elicit the best blood sugar response we can throughout the day. So with that, the methods that we've identified for improving metabolic efficiency, you can see the 5 that are listed here. What I will start by saying is, it does have a huge behavioral modification component first. So some people, what I'm saying is, if you're not ready to make a significant nutrition change, some of these dietary strategies will absolutely not work for you. However, on the flip side, if you're ready to make a change and you've been frustrated, or you hear what I've been saying and you're like, God, I really want to try this, then I'll give you a couple that make a lot of sense right now. But please remember that depending on what stage of change that you're in, you may or may not see more or less success with one of these dietary strategies. So that said, the easiest one, the number one, why we put it as number one, is just simply the carbohydrate to protein ratios and what I call the hand model. So from there, that's the one that everybody listening can take away, you can use right now. I'll just say that I am not a calorie counting sport dietitian. I don't expect anyone to do calorie counting throughout the day. I think there's a lot of other things that can be definitely worthwhile in terms of listening to your hunger and getting back to your instinctual eating patterns. But the hand model is simply this. You have two hands, right? And one hand is fiber-rich foods. So those are your vegetables, those are your fruits, those are your whole grains, not necessarily your refined processed sugars, but your whole grains, right, that a lot of people actually don't eat because they don't know what whole grains are. That's one hand. The other hand is made up of protein sources. So that could be chicken, fish, steak, you name it, right? If you can actually match your left hand, which is carbohydrate and fiber, to your right hand, which is protein, you will control your blood sugar beautifully. And that's what we call a 1-to-1 ratio of carbohydrate to protein. And I can get into the science, I won't too much, but suffice to say 1 gram of carbohydrate has 4 calories. 1 gram of protein has 4 calories. The reason this hand model works is because it balances out at a 1-to-1 ratio. So that's ideal. With some athletes, I'll go up to a 2-to-1 depending on their nutrition periodization, their physical training. So they'll have 2 hands of fiber-rich foods to 1 hand of protein. That model is the most simplest model that anybody can follow because it helps you with volume. You don't have to necessarily measure anything. You don't have to weigh anything. But more importantly, you have to listen to your body. So that's easiest. The number two, the periodization plates, is basically looking at the food on your plate and partitioning it between the fiber, the protein, and the fat based on your energy needs. So if you're in a high training load right now, your plate may have to have a little bit more of the fiber-rich foods, maybe a little bit more fruit, maybe a little bit more veggies. It kind of depends on the dietary strategy you're following. So the periodization plates basically say, look at your plate, switch around your nutrients based on your training needs, and listen to your hunger. Okay. Number three is carbohydrate unloading. So for our sugarholics out there, our carbohydrate holics, right? It's really tough. I just had this conversation with a friend of mine. He's trying to reduce his overall sugar intake, and I told him, you know, what could be successful if you have a high sugar intake, a high carbohydrate diet. It may not be the best idea to switch it to a lower carbohydrate diet from day 1 to day 2. So that's the unloading phase. So I usually allow 4 weeks for an athlete to unload their carbohydrates so they don't have a negative impact on their training. So usually you kind of feel lethargic, you feel a little bit grumpy, you don't feel like you have a lot of energy. It's just your body adapting. That's all it is. Once your body adapts, and it usually takes about 7 to 14 days to adapt, once it adapts, it becomes kind of a new body, a new person, right? So that's the unloading phase. And then the low carb, high fat. I mean, I've seen huge success with low carb, high fat. I'm not going to lie, right? And it's not the nutritional ketosis under 20 grams a day. I'm just talking about controlling carbohydrates. And I'm going to share with you all one of my secrets and my theory, which has proven true in every athlete that I've worked with yet, that I believe that the ideal carbohydrate intake per day for endurance athletes is between 60 and 150 grams per day. And that holds true with everyone I've worked with so far. So that's more the low carb, high fat plan. You can think of it that I think of this whole thing as just controlling carbohydrates. If I can control carbohydrates and I can actually maximize some more protein and fat in my diet, I'm going to control my blood sugar. I'm going to control my fat burning response, meaning I'm going to improve it. I'm going to lead a better health, or I'm going to lead a better life in terms of my health, and I'm going to perform better, right? And then the last one, the fat adaptation, carbohydrate restoration. I don't like to do that with a lot of people. I've done it a lot with some short course professional male triathletes. All right. So basically, what we do is we follow a lower carb, higher fat diet at certain times of the year, but then we restore carbohydrates in the 2 or 3 days leading up to a significant training event or race to make sure their glycogen stores are where they need to be. Now, like I said, I don't do that very often, just to be quite honest with you. We've seen it in research, it works in research, it works in real life, But once somebody is adapted to a controlled carbohydrate diet, you usually don't have to add in a lot more carbohydrates at all in their daily nutrition, because again, that the body is very smart in adapting itself. So that's in a nutshell the 5 different strategies. Number 1 being where everybody should start.
So Greg, looking at these 5 strategies, when you started metabolic efficiency, and currently continuing it today, which one of these are you implementing? And I guess kind of overall, what kind of a change in your daily nutrition did this represent? I mean, was this a big wholesale change for you, or kind of just if you could speak specifically to that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief, but I do feel like I have a lot to say about this. So, when I first met Bob, I was like I said, it was back in 2009, and I was coming off a career as a lightweight rower. So I had another kind of complexity added to this, where I had a very interesting relationship with food. To try to put it in simple terms, my whole day-to-day approach to eating was my number on the scale would dictate the success of me and my teammates, and that's a pretty negative approach to have to what you're putting in your body. So for me, eating, I was really training to try to burn off whatever I would put in my body to get light enough to make weight, to make it into the boat, to be able to row the race. Not even speaking about how I felt in that race, just to be able to make it into the boat. And it was, so I kind of came to Bob with this: I hate food. I want to eat as little of it as I can, but enough that I can actually get through what I'm doing. So I had, like I said, a very traditional approach: lots and lots and lots of carbs, all white flours, breads, bagels, pastas, all that sort of stuff. So when I first started with Bob, I'd say that we started with really a combination of 1 and 3, which is the protein ratio hand model and the carb unloading. I was probably consuming somewhere around 250 to 350 grams of carbs a day, and most of those were not any of the quote unquote good carbs, fruits or vegetables. It was mostly just bagels in the morning and pastas at lunch and dinner and pizza, whatever it would be, candy, regular soda. I mean, I was doing the worst nutritional approach I could while still going somewhat fast. As we started to get more comfortable with it, basically what Bob walked me through was, and it was great to have someone really hold my hand through the process, we really unloaded my carb intake 300 down to 250, down to 200, 150, 100. I believe, and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we got somewhere down around 50 grams of carbs a day before I really turned into kind of a jerk and couldn't balance out my nutritional intake with my exercise output. And then we scaled me back up and found kind of a happy medium, and really then switched over to really paying attention to the protein ratios in the hand model, making sure that I was really limiting the intake of starchy foods and white flours, and really a lot of just changing the diet over to mostly just meat, dairy, fruit, vegetables, and really making sure that whenever I was putting carbs in me, I was also putting some protein and fat and balancing those macronutrients. But it didn't just stop there. We also, now moving on to where I am and being much more comfortable with this metabolic efficiency approach, and having it not even be something I think about on a regular basis, just being a staple of my day-to-day training. I wouldn't even call it nutrition. It's my day-to-day way of living now. We use the periodization plates depending on the time of year, like Bob was saying. It's something I don't even have to think about. I might wake up the morning after a really hard, stressful, high-intensity anaerobic workout, and I'm craving a second piece of fruit in the morning. I don't think, okay, well, my body must be at a glycogen depleted level right now and I need more sugar. No, for me, it's just I feel like having another orange or another apple. So I eat that, and if I really think about the science behind it, that's absolutely what Bob is laying out with the periodization plates. So day-to-day nutrition changes depending on what my day-to-day training plan is. I would say, though, hopefully finally giving an answer to your question, Varn, really number 4 is kind of where we've settled out. I'd say, again, Bob can correct me, but I think we're on probably around 70, maybe 65 to 75 grams of carbs a day, predominantly through fruits and vegetables, with a lot of just meat and cheese. So I love it. It's great. It feels like I'm cheating every day by eating, things that we've kind of grew up thinking weren't useful fuels for endurance athletes or weren't necessarily the best things to eat a lot. But yeah, for me, it's a lot of meat and cheese, and then just my carbs, my low carb intake comes from fruits and vegetables predominantly.
We had a great question. I know we're doing questions at the end, but very relevant to what we're talking about right here from Paul. Greg, you're a busy guy. You run your own business. You're training. You're on the go frequently, living in New York as well. What are some go-to, metabolically efficient foods for you when you are on the go? That because I think oftentimes for people that's where the struggle comes, right? A lot of the quick and convenient options are going to be your bagels and your sandwiches and things like that. So what have you found that's worked for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question because and I would say the biggest one you can imagine with me racing. I race fairly often and I race internationally quite often. So I'm on airplanes a lot. And I raced earlier this year in South Africa. I'll race internationally again later this season. When you're on a flight or traveling for 35 hours, it's really hard to go to somewhere in the airport and eat anything that's healthy. So it does take a little bit more preparation on the front end, but it's nothing that is overly stressful. So one of my biggest go-tos is just a simple trail mix. Putting together a trail mix that I like, fruits, maybe a little bit of dried fruit, but mostly just nuts that I like. I'm going to make sure that I get good fats, good proteins out of it. Depending on where I am in my training cycle or how badly I'm craving it, I might add some dark chocolate pieces to it just for a little bit of flavor or a little bit of sugar. My other big go-to are good yogurts. I'm thinking like a skyr yogurt, like Siggi's, or something like a Chobani, something with a really good 1-to-1 protein to carb ratio that travels really easily, that I can take through an airport, I can get on a plane with, I can eat on a long drive. And also, along that same line with the simple fats, string cheese, little prepackaged string cheese is a fantastic go-to. Most of the stuff is somewhere 7 to 10 grams of protein, and it just feels like it's a really easy way. I always call it, not directly to Bob, but I always call it cheating my protein ratio. So if I find that I maybe had a piece of fruit or something like that, an apple, and I'm worried that I'm too high on my carb intake, I can balance that out really quickly with something like a skyr yogurt or a piece of string cheese. And then along the way, there are also some other products that are out there. I love the UCAN bars. They're a great thing that I'm sure we're going to discuss in a little bit here. But they travel really, really easily. So having a good bar that you can always have in your bag has been my easiest way of getting through tough times when I can't sit down and have a real meal.
Bob, without turning this too much into this is exactly what you should eat, anything you wanted to piggyback on what Greg said in terms of metabolically efficient snacks?
Can you repeat that again, Brad?
Yeah. I was saying, and without turning this too much into this is exactly what you should eat, because I know everybody's different, but what are some good snacks that you found for people on the go when they're trying to follow this blood sugar control and metabolic efficiency lifestyle?
Yeah, you were cutting out just a little bit. Did you ask for foods?
Yeah, just food ideas for like
Okay.
metabolically efficient snacks.
Oh yeah. For snacks, it depends on if you need to be perishable or non-perishable. But I agree with a lot of what Greg said. I'm a huge fan of smoothies. Smoothies you can dump anything in there. You can put fat in there, protein. I mean, vegetables. I put a lot of kale and spinach in my smoothies. So I think smoothies are kind of underrated because they are on the go. They'll keep for a couple hours for sure if you're driving or whatever, or you can stick them in the fridge at work. So smoothies are really easy to make a 1-to-1 ratio, even less than a 1-to-1 ratio of carbohydrate to protein. So that's a simple one, and you can throw coconut oil, olive oil in there. I'm a huge fan of just good meats and cheeses. Oftentimes I'll have that a lot here at Energy Performance. Just put it in the fridge, and that's my, I guess you could call it a lunch. Smoothie and some meat and cheese. So I think things like that are very simple. I'm also a huge fan of things, not necessarily this is a snack, but like Cobb salads. So you're looking at things like combining bacon and feta cheese and avocados and a whole bunch of different veggies. Hard-boiled eggs I think is a great on-the-fly snack. So there's a lot of things that it really, like, if you think about this, I mean, I hear this and I'm hearing what you're saying and what Greg's saying is you guys that are listening, you have to put this into perspective. Like, Greg's a professional Ironman athlete and he's eating between 65 and 75 grams of carbohydrate a day. Like if that doesn't resonate with you, do your homework a little bit, because most athletes are consuming, most of these pros are consuming upwards of 300 to 500 grams a day. So one, let me just emphasize that, and two, let me emphasize that this is real food we're talking about, right? It's eggs, it's cheese, it's bacon, it's kale, spinach, right? There's nothing fancy that you really have to do. What we're trying to teach is that you look at food differently, and you actually look at it instead of plugging the whole carbohydrate loading mentality that I was raised with and I was taught in academia. We're starting to teach how can our body rely on this type of food and what energy can it get from it, right? And to a certain point, you guys will get like Greg is, where he's on autopilot. He doesn't have to think about this anymore. But certainly we're coming back to the food model and saying, what makes most sense without having to load our bodies with any one nutrient, to be honest with you. That's why more of this balance of macronutrients really exists.
So, Bob, we've talked about the daily nutrition aspect of it. So let's get into the training nutrition aspect of it. And despite a lot of compelling evidence, which we're going to show a couple case studies, there's still people, even recently, kind of still pushing the old school approach, right? What are we looking at over here?
It's hilarious. I mean, you guys can see it from this slide, and every time I hear something like this, and more importantly, read something like this in a very, very good scientific journal, as you can see here, it was referenced last year, and good researcher, this stuff is still floating around, and I'm not going to say it doesn't work. What I'm going to tell you is there's a better way. It's like training for marathons. Years ago, we used to think that the long runs had to be 23 to 25 miles, but nowadays we know that we can actually manipulate the volume and the quality a little bit to be better quality based. And that's what we're talking here. We're talking about better quality nutrition instead of the volume-based nutrition. So even with these guidelines that came out last year, and they didn't come out, they basically just put a new infographic up to make it prettier, because these things have existed for at least 8-9 years now. But just to show you, right, the onus still and the popular guidelines are still, as you can see, based on the duration of exercise, is how many grams of carbohydrate that you quote unquote need per hour, right? So you can see as the duration of exercise goes up, then you need more carbohydrate per hour. Now, here's what's funny, right? So you take an athlete like Greg, he's doing long course, right? He's doing 9-hour Ironmans, 4 hours and change half Ironmans. That's longer than 2.5 hours, but is he consuming 90 grams of multiple transportable carbohydrate per hour? No, absolutely not. So it's funny because we still have this old school that is still being promoted, but again, it's what we're trying to do is create this paradigm shift of quality versus quantity. And you can even see on the left side of the slide where it says, I'll just highlight this, it says these recommendations are for well-trained athletes. Aspiring athletes may need to adjust these recommendations downward. So in my mind, and I read a lot of research, I know what researchers have to do to get published. In my mind, that tells me they don't really know. But if I were to interpret this, and I'm working with Greg, and I'm saying, well, Greg, you're definitely a well-trained athlete, therefore you need 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. That's just silly. It's wrong. And in fact, he's proved that wrong repeatedly over and over again. So we do have this fight, if you will, in the sport nutrition field, and I'm not going to say what's right or wrong. What I'm going to say is there's a better way to do things, a more efficient way of doing things, and that's the path that we're starting to take, and that's the new school sport nutrition that we're starting to see in this field of endurance athletics.
So let's look at a couple case studies, and I just will highlight this slide because I know this is so counter to everything you're doing, but with this quote, we currently lack the appropriate tools to accurately measure exercise sports performance, in particular, the ability to detect small changes that are worthwhile to a competitive athlete in order to change the outcomes of real-world events. Well, this is precisely what you do, Bob, right? You use the tools to accurately measure exercise and sports performance and then change real-life outcomes. So let's look at this example right here. What are we looking at on the screen?
Yeah, and this is one of my early successes, and this is, when metabolic efficiency, really I started getting a good handle on it and really started playing with Ironman athletes, and this was years ago, as you can see, but this was a 50-year-old male Ironman, just age group athlete, right? Age group are trying to get to Kona, trying to punch his ticket, and he came to me years ago with basically saying, listen, I've got GI distress on the run, I throw up or I do something else in the porta potties every mile in the marathon, can you help? And traditionally, as you can see from the gut health, he came to me because of GI distress, and he was consuming 250 to 350 calories per hour on the bike, and very similar actually on the run. He was doing about 200 calories on the run per hour. So what we did was we just did a little metabolic efficiency, experiment at that time. And, I dropped his carbohydrates, and it was funny because I actually did a dietary log on him, and he was consuming 72% of his daily calories from carbohydrate, just ridiculous amount of carbs. So what I did was I actually brought him down more towards that 50, not even low carb, how we would, I guess, think of low carb, but lower for him. So I brought him down to like 50% carbs and, bumped up his protein, bumped up his fat. What we saw throughout this 3 months, I was working with 3 months before I ran Louisville in 2009. What we saw that through training, because we had no testing facilities where he lived. He didn't live here in Colorado. He was in California. And at the time, there weren't any of my metabolic efficiency training specialists, and we didn't have a lot of testing facilities. So what we did was we used the marker of his training calories to see how efficient he was becoming. So over the 3 months, he was dropping his hourly intake from 350 to 250 to 150, right? So we were right around the 120 to 150 mark in terms of how many calories he would consume on the bike. And then he went into Louisville, and he had no GI distress running off the bike and all that, but you never know until you put it into the context of a race. So he did Louisville, no GI distress whatsoever, which was the reason why we worked with each other. But then he reported his calories. And as you can see here, calories consumed per hour were 86 calories for a 50-year-old who pulled off a 10:02, obviously punched his ticket to Kona. That, to me, before that, that's unheard of. I was actually doubting him. I thought he was lying to me in his food log. I kept doing the math. It wasn't until his repeated Ironman attempts or Ironman efforts, as you can see, and you can see the calories, his times, the Ironman, the year, right? We're looking right around the mid 70s to 90s. Now, that one blip on the radar screen in 2011 when he did a 10:20 at St. George, did 37 calories per hour. Not that I advised him to do this, but he wanted to see how many calories he could get away with in terms of the low end and still have a good performance. So he was kind of doing a little test within himself, but it's proof that when you develop your body's efficiency to use more fat, preserve carbohydrates, and I should say this, you're using more fat at a higher intensity, and I'll show you that on some of the case studies, but it's proof that your body can adapt nutritionally and metabolically to the food that you're giving it to induce blood sugar changes, positive blood sugar changes. And it's proof in the pudding. We've got so many athletes like this. This is just one that I like to highlight, but we've got one on the phone that has been doing it and lived it and having great success with it also.
So Bob, as you talk about burning fat at higher intensities, let's look at your personal case study and kind of take two different situations. So go ahead and talk about this here.
Yeah, this was me a couple of years ago, and you can see I was a vegetarian for 10 years, and triathlete. That's when I was doing a little bit more ultra running, and you can see this is I've created not only the metabolic efficiency concept, but also the physiological test to test for metabolic efficiency, right? And it uses a metabolic cart, and I won't get into that. But what you're seeing on the screen, these two lines represent carbohydrate burning, which is the blue line, and fat burning, which is the red line. So each percentage is a stage in the test. So from left to right, you go from lower intensity to higher intensity. So you can see that on my speed on the bottom from the miles per hour, the pace per minute per mile. So what we see here is that I did achieve a metabolic efficiency points, but it was right when I started, and that was that 50-50 split of carbohydrate to fat. And what you see as the intensity goes on, I was burning more sugar, more carbohydrate. I never was very, very efficient metabolically in terms of burning more fat at higher intensities. And I will say this graph is what we see in about 60% of endurance athletes who usually come from that higher carb diet plan that they follow, right? So this was me, and the whole onus of doing this was I wanted to do an experiment with myself, and more so from a health perspective, and I'll tell you that because I will show some blood work. So day one or before day one, I did blood work, I did metabolic efficiency test, got that data, and then I turned non-vegetarian. And you can go to the next slide here, because in 4 weeks, what I did was I ate animal protein, my carbohydrates or my protein sources were not just only carbohydrate sources anymore, right? So I limited my carbohydrate intake. I was between about 60 and 80 grams a day, had more fat in my diet. My protein stayed about the same, but it was mostly from animal products now. So I changed a lot of things nutritionally. I will tell you this. I did not think this metabolic shift could happen as profoundly as you see in 4 weeks. So what we're seeing now, and what's really interesting to note is the paces are the same, right? We have to compare apples to apples here, right? So what we see is red line is fat burning, blue line is carbohydrate burning. Now the first test that I did, I finished at the end stage was a 6:44 minute per mile. That's where I had to stop, right? My body was done. Now with this test, 4 weeks later, I actually increased my stage length by 5 minutes and I ran a 6:31 mile. But what you see is I had no metabolic efficiency point because even at a 6:31 minute per mile, and you can kind of see it in the numbers, I was still burning 61% of my energy from fat. So can you burn fat at higher intensities? Yes. Can you teach your body to burn fat at higher intensities? Oh yeah, and it does not take that long. Like we've shown about 1 to 2 weeks. These profound effects happened in 4 weeks, right? So that was mostly from a dietary shift, right? And I always say this, I haven't said it yet, but 75% of the game of improving your body's metabolic efficiency comes from nutrition, and about 25% comes from training or from exercise. So if you look at the next slide, you'll be able to see my blood work differences. So if you look at the September 28th, 2012 versus November 3rd, 2012, all the bads decreased, all the goods increased. And usually we don't see those type of changes in 4 weeks. Usually we're talking about 8 to 12 weeks to see very profound blood work changes. But again, my cholesterol went down, my LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, went down, my good cholesterol, HDL, went up. So this was proof to me that, number one, a vegetarian diet was not right for my body, just from a genetic perspective. And number two, that I could change metabolic efficiency to actually not have a metabolic efficiency point because of physical fatigue, not nutritional fatigue. And that was really a huge take-home message for me, and really what started this whole low carb or controlling carb plan that I now institute with quite a few of my athletes. And again, don't confuse it as low carb. It's controlling the carbohydrates very strategically.
So Bob and Greg, now, obviously we've talked about a lot of this, and the real question people are asking is, okay, so this is what do I do to fuel my training and fuel my races? I know we're running a little bit long today. You guys got about another 10 minutes to stick around with us while we talk a little bit about the implementation of UCAN.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Awesome, guys. So I want to just, understanding that not everybody on this session knows what UCAN is, want to give just a quick background to kind of the uniqueness of UCAN as a sports nutrition product that supports metabolic efficiency. So what's unique about UCAN is the carbohydrate in our product, which we call superstarch. And the origins of the superstarch were for our founder's son, Jonah. Jonah has a life-threatening disease called glycogen storage disease, which essentially he can't break down carbohydrates into glucose to give him energy. So these kids have severe and chronic hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, low energy, where previously they were being fed every 90 minutes to 2 hours with a small finite dose of just regular cornstarch that you buy at the grocery store. Because of the way the condition affected an enzyme in their liver, cornstarch was something that, because of the way it was broken down, was actually able to give them steady glucose, but only for a very short period of time. So Jonah's family, they were really living a life by the clock. They were feeding their son every 2 hours, 3 to 4 times in the middle of the night, very stressful lifestyle. So in 2000, they started a foundation, and they were basically researching all different types of carbohydrates. In their mind, they wanted to look for the world's best carbohydrate, something that they could give their child prior to sleeping at night that would break down slowly and steadily over time and control his blood sugar for a long period of time. So that's where superstarch really came about. For 8 years, the top carbohydrate researchers in the world, they looked at rices, tapioca, barley, different starches. They looked at everything that already was out there, that already existed. And what they finally found was they start with a specific type of non-GMO cornstarch, and they put it through just a cooking process with heat and water over a period of 40 hours. This process is completely natural, no chemicals, no enzymes. And the way this carbohydrate is cooked actually slows the breakdown, slows the release. So it's delivering steady glucose over time instead of a big spike, a big surge of energy all at once. Now Jonah takes the equivalent of 3 packets of UCAN, about 90 grams of this superstarch prior to sleeping at night, and it keeps his blood sugar steady for 8 hours. So the superstarch, which is the unique ingredient in UCAN, this was really created for Jonah as a way, and these kids to keep their blood sugar stable throughout the night, which is, again, the core principle of metabolic efficiency. Everything we've been talking about today goes back to blood sugar control. Just a couple notes. So we mentioned the carbohydrate. It's a food. It's completely natural. It's actually less processed than oatmeal, which a lot of people think of as a healthy carbohydrate. Non-GMO, gluten-free as well. So as we looked, the sole purpose of this was to stabilize blood sugar in these kids. But we started wondering, how would this impact the regular person or athletes? And Bob, you can recount this, but Bob was actually one of the first guys we contacted. Bob was at the University of Florida at the time. And Bob, when Superstarch and UCAN was positioned to you initially, how was it positioned to you, and what were your thoughts?
Well, I thought initially when Peter, reached out to me, because I get these quite often. People say, hey, I've got this product and blah blah blah. So, I was thinking, great. What intrigued me though was not that another phone call was coming on in my office, but what intrigued me was when Peter said, this is not a sugar, right? So he kind of had my attention, because I'm like, well, wait a second. Everything that I've learned has been sugar based. Why are you coming to me with something that is not sugar? So my interest was piqued, and then he said, everything that we said, it doesn't spike your blood sugar, and all that we've been talking about, he was touting on our phone call. And I just remember I said, listen, what you've got could be something very special in the sport nutrition field, but unfortunately, I need to see some research first. And it was great from my perspective, because then I didn't talk to them for a while, and then they came back and said, okay, there was just a study done, and now we've got some data for you. Can you look at it? So early on, I was not a believer. I was a skeptic for sure, as most people are with metabolic efficiency. But it wasn't until some proof was given to me by Peter, and more importantly, that I actually started understanding the product more and understanding how it worked as a food product and how it controlled blood sugar. Then it got my attention. I remember telling them years ago, before they actually came to market, I said, this could completely revolutionize the way we approach sport nutrition for athletes. And I will go on the book saying it has revolutionized the way we approach sport nutrition with athletes.
So in terms of the research Bob referenced, before we came out on the market with this UCAN and with the Superstarch in it, we wanted to test it against maltodextrin, because from a sports nutrition standpoint, you name the brand, go to your local tri store, bike shop, running store, pick up pretty much any product off the shelf, flip it around. One of the first 2 ingredients you're going to see is likely maltodextrin. So maltodextrin is the quote-unquote complex carbohydrate used in the majority of sports nutrition products. So if Superstarch worked the same, again, remember, this was not created for sports nutrition. There was going to be no reason to go into sports nutrition. It was only if this was doing something different and something that was more beneficial in terms of energy delivery. So what you're seeing on this graph is 25 grams of superstarch versus 25 grams of maltodextrin. With the blue line and maltodextrin, you get that big initial spike. It's everything we've talked about with blood sugar. You get that spike, and about 30 minutes later, your blood sugar drops. Now think about it. Why do they tell you to take a gel every 25 to 40 minutes? It's really coinciding with that time your blood sugar drops. When your blood sugar drops, you start to feel, that bonk-like feeling that people term it as, or that foggy feeling, fatigue, and you need to raise it back up. With UCAN, what we're seeing is with the same number of calories, the same gram of carbohydrate, first of all, there's no spike, but the decline is very steady over time. And what's really interesting to look at is about 2 hours later on the x-axis, your blood sugar is still right around where it started. So we're really, steady blood sugar can be translated into steady energy. We're really on the same number of calories, giving you that steady and sustained energy for 2 to 3 times as long as an equivalent serving of maltodextrin. The other really unique thing about the way you can, and actually this is, I won't get into this too much, but we recently, have partnered with a medical foods company who've paired our superstarch carbohydrate with protein, some fiber, and some fat, and they actually recently released the results of this study on pre-diabetic individuals, and they're really comparing the glucose response of their product, with the superstarch, protein, fiber, and fat against oatmeal. And again, here you see that with the red line being the product with superstarch in it, it's even providing a steadier, sustained glucose response or blood sugar management compared to oatmeal, which again is something we think of as an energy sustaining food. So it's really thinking about UCAN not just as a sports nutrition fuel, but there's a lot of application for it in your daily diet, just as another tool to control blood sugar. You know, there's a lot of tools. Greg and Bob talked about different snacks, different smoothies to control blood sugar, and that's really what makes UCAN so unique in a sports nutrition product. You know, you're not going to have gels and sugar-based fuels when the training doesn't justify it, and perhaps after today you may not have those at all anymore. But really, with UCAN, there's an implementation in it for training, but there's also a daily diet implementation. But the other thing I want to just highlight in terms of the science is that Bob talked about this hormone insulin. It's a hormone that every time you get those blood sugar spikes, your pancreas releases insulin, and insulin's going to tell your body to store more fat rather than burn it. With UCAN, with the superstarch, because the carbohydrate trickles in so slowly and doesn't cause a rise in blood sugar, there's no need for the body to produce insulin. So we're essentially a carbohydrate that, because we flatline insulin, we're allowing you to freely burn fat throughout exercise. Basically, when you're exercising, your body's trying to burn fat and wants to burn fat. But when you keep introducing sugars and keep causing those sugar spikes, you're going to limit its ability to burn fat. So we're really allowing your body to do what it wants to do during exercise, which is tap into and burn stored fat. And even a lean triathlete like Greg, even Bob, who's very lean, we all, as Bob talked about off the top, have, you know, tens of thousands of calories of stored fat that's just waiting to be tapped into for fuel. And UCAN's really a carbohydrate source, a fuel source that's both giving you a steady release of glucose, but also allowing your body to tap into and burn fat. So, Greg, let's talk about nuts and bolts usage as we see the different products on the screen. How do you use UCAN in your training? And I want to say in your training because so many times we think about what am I going to do on race day, but really with UCAN and metabolic efficiency, it's really such a key concept to implement in training because that's when your body's going to adapt. That's when you're going to get the fitness and the body composition and the health benefits from it. So, Greg, what has kind of UCAN done in terms of changing the way you fuel your day-to-day training?
Sure. Well, I start off by, I always say the same thing to Varn whenever we get together, which is your business model is not good because your science is so good. So when I was on older traditional products, I would buy a lot of product. I would go through tubs and tubs and packets and bars and all that stuff because every workout that was anything over really an hour, I was taking something, whether it was a gel or a sugary drink or whatever it was, I was taking in some sort of nutrition because that's the way I was schooled to believe I needed to fuel. On this metabolically efficient diet, this metabolic efficiency approach to daily living, eating, training, whatever, I just don't need as much stuff. So basically a normal training day will look like I'll wake up, I'll eat a normal breakfast, and a normal breakfast for me is just like Bob was saying before, something like eggs with some cheese mixed in, a little bit of breakfast meat, whether it's bacon or sausage or something like that, and then a piece of fruit on the side, and I'm good to go. That fuels me for whatever my morning workout's going to be. So basically, you can hydrate as a part of anything that I do, just a zero-calorie electrolyte replacement. So I'll use that for anything. Just sitting around at my desk doing some work, writing some emails, I'm drinking hydrate, but also out on a ride, whether that's an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, whatever it is, I'm always drinking hydrate just to replace any electrolytes that I'm burning off. Really, though, when it comes to my usage of the fuel, the UCAN fuel and the UCAN with protein, those I kind of reserve for really hard training days or things that are going to last me longer than, say, 2.5 hours. My body is metabolically efficient enough that I can sustain a fair amount of intensity for 2 hours and be absolutely fine with no supplemental intakes. So let's say it's a 2.5 or a 3 hour ride. I'll then turn to the UCAN fuel or the UCAN with protein. And this is a big point that I always try to make with my athletes or people that are asking me about UCAN. You got to get rid of those traditional notions of what's the before drink, what's the during drink, what's the after recovery drink. Other more traditional nutritional products out there, you'll have the non-protein drink during your workout and you'll have the protein drink after. I get rid of all of those thoughts when it comes to UCAN. Really what I use it for is I find that the protein sits really well with me when I'm riding a bike. It makes me feel a little bit more satiated. It feels a little bit more full. So I tend to use the protein products on the bike, and I tend to use the non-protein products when I'm off the bike. They go down a little bit easier when I'm bouncing around, running up and down, all that stuff. So really, for me, a long, hard run, I'll use something like the tropical orange or the lemonade. I really like the fruity flavors of the UCAN Fuel. And something on the bike, a 2.5, 3, 4, 5 hour ride, or in an Ironman race, I'm using one of the protein products. I was just saying this to you the other day, Varun, but at Eagleman, I started using the chocolate, and it was delicious. Even though it was 96 degrees at Eagleman, 80% humidity, the chocolate protein UCAN went down really, really nicely. And then just the last bit of it is the UCAN snack bar. And for me, that's really what it is for me. It's a snack bar. I'll cut it up into little pieces and use it on a ride. But where I find myself using that more often actually is, let's say I wake up, I eat breakfast at 7 a.m. I mean to get on the bike by 8 o'clock, but then it's 9:30 when I'm done writing emails or answering phone calls or whatever, and I'm hopping on the bike, but it's been a couple hours since I ate. That's when I turn to the snack bar and I say, I don't need another full meal, but I don't really feel like I need to go and mix up a bottle of fuel or protein, so I'm just going to quickly eat this bar and then be good for another 2, 3, 4 hours of work.
It's a great insight, Greg. And to piggyback on what you said, the UCAN Fuel, the UCAN with protein, and the UCAN Snack, they all have superstarch. So they're all going to yield that steady blood sugar effect. Now, the Fuel has the superstarch and electrolytes. The protein has the superstarch, electrolytes, plus protein. And the Snack has the superstarch, healthy fats, electrolytes, or no electrolytes, excuse me, protein and fiber. So with the UCAN with protein and the UCAN Snack, you're still getting the same steady blood sugar, steady energy effect. So you can really, like Greg talked about, pick and choose, based on how you're feeling, based on your hunger. If you want to use those as a pre-workout fuel, if you're a little bit hungrier, protein is going to help curb that hunger in the stomach. The UCAN with protein also works great for recovery. Protein for the muscles, and you have superstarch to keep your blood sugar steady and to continue burning fat. Bob, now we've heard it from the elite triathlete, professional triathlete perspective. You work with a number of age groupers as well, and I think you've said this to me before, but nearly every age grouper that's in endurance sports has some type of body composition goal in mind, right? So what's the benefit that they can find? I often like to say that, from a sports nutrition standpoint, as we see endurance sports becoming so much more mainstream and so many people getting into them, UCAN is kind of something that's marrying that idea of fitness and endurance, which, with the sugar-based fuels, really, they weren't going hand in hand. You saw so many people gaining weight when they were training for an endurance event because of all the sugar intake. So what's the benefit of this that you see for the age grouper who's not racing at the level Greg is?
Yeah, and even age group are just fitness enthusiasts. Everyone does want to change their body comp, their aesthetic some way. So aside from food, like we've talked about in the presentation, using UCAN, it's easy. Like for the age group athlete, I've not had one person complain about GI distress yet by using UCAN before, during a training session or exercise session. So that's a huge thing. But think about this, like and we were talking about earlier, if you set up your body to burn more fat before an exercise session, you are relying on more fat during that exercise session. Thus, you're contributing to better composition goals, meaning reducing fat and hopefully improving lean mass if you're doing some type of weightlifting. But what I think a lot of people miss is the after exercise approach. So people have whatever, you name it, but it's usually based on high carbohydrates, high simple carbohydrates, because that's what we were taught. We were taught the 4-to-1 ratio, the 3-to-1 ratio. Like, you've got to maximize glycogen reserves or your repletion rate. So what a lot of people don't understand is after exercise, your body's actually in a very fat adapted state. It wants to burn a lot of fat just from simple metabolism. The worst thing you can do is actually feed a lot of simple sugars or simple carbohydrates. And where I see UCAN coming in very handy is not only beforehand for these exercise people with body composition goals and athletes, but also after exercise, because that's honestly where I see most mistakes happening now is, they'll have a banana afterwards on their way home, or they'll have this engulfing simple sugar drink or whatever it is, right? And they're not focusing on the it's called EPOC in exercise physiology, excess post-oxygen consumption. But you've got an increased metabolic rate for about 24 to 48 hours after exercise. So we actually have to work with that, and that's where I actually do quite a bit of UCAN protein with people, is to set their body more into that fat adaptation stage after exercise, which can last a day or two. So that's where I think a lot of people miss that window of using UCAN.
And we talk about something that's so common for recovery, right? Something like chocolate milk with 20 or 25 grams of sugar. So shifting away from something that's more sugar-based to something like the chocolate UCAN that's going to support the stabilization of blood sugar. Is that kind of one of the ways you're talking about?
Absolutely, hands down.
Bob and Greg, we really appreciate your guys' time. I know we've run a little over with you guys. I want to respect your time, and if you guys need to jump off, I'm going to stick around for just about another 10 minutes and walk folks through a few slides just on how to implement UCAN in training. You guys are welcome to hang around, but I know we've run a little late. You guys are both busy folks. So I want to thank you for joining us. Really, really appreciate the insight. And I am going to move to the slide, but if you guys need to jump off, then feel free. Thank you both.
Thanks, Greg. I'll hang out for a few minutes though.
Awesome. That sounds great. So we'll have Greg stick around with us. So as we talked about UCAN and implementing it, and making it a core pillar of training, there's a pre-workout application, a during application, and a recovery application of UCAN, and there's also the application of implementing it as part of your diet, as another tool to stabilize blood sugar. So again, UCAN, there's the bars, but primarily the products are in powdered form as a drink, and you want to think of UCAN not as something that you sip on from a drink standpoint, but really something that you're consuming as a pre-workout snack. So Greg, when you use UCAN to fuel your training, give us an idea. Like, even people have questions, nuts and bolts. How much are you mixing it with, and how much out from your workout are you consuming it?
Yeah, so I've experimented with this a ton, and I'm going to speak specifically for a race because honestly, for me, everything else in training is a lot easier. Race day, you're dealing with early mornings, nervousness, whatever it is. You're in a foreign place, you're in a hotel, you can't make your food, all that sort of stuff. So when I started with UCAN, I was mixing it, again, traditionally, I was going 20 ounces of water with one scoop or one packet, and I found that even now after racing for a number of years, racing at a professional level, I still get super, super nervous before events. And if I'm trying to down 20 ounces of UCAN plus some water, plus some salt, plus all this stuff, I am not in a good spot before a race. So what I have turned to, and I've done this as recently as Raleigh 70.3 a couple weeks ago, and then Eagleman, was I've started mixing it with less and less water. Eagleman, I believe before race morning, it was about an hour and a half out from the race just to give myself a chance to digest and hit the bathroom if I needed to. I did one packet of chocolate UCAN, so that's a protein one, with just about 6 or 7 ounces of water. So pretty concentrated. It was kind of like a nice chocolate milkshake to start off the morning. And I can get that whole thing down in just 2 or 3 sips. And really, I'm just fueling myself for the day with that. And there's no worry about, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to get all this in? Am I going to throw up? How nervous am I? All that stuff. It's just 2 big sips and it's down and I'm good to go.
When you're taking UCAN, for the longer workouts on the bike during your training, and you kind of just identified this, the amount of water you mix the product with has no bearing on digestion, has no bearing on how it works. So it's truly water and fluid as a delivery mechanism for UCAN, as I like to term it. You can mix it as thick or as thin as you'd like. So logistically, we always tell folks kind of keep your nutrition, your UCAN in one bottle, and then keep your hydration separate, right? That way you're not really, thinking I need to drink X amount of UCAN every so often to also stay hydrated. How do you logistically handle what you have on the bike in terms of separating the fuel versus the hydration?
Sure. So yeah, let's talk about the most complex one is obviously an Ironman where I'm on the bike for 112 miles and I'm trying to ride somewhere, depending on the course, anywhere from 4.5 hours to 5, 10, something like that. What I have found that has been most successful for me, and I'll just be really specific here, is that I ride with the bottle up front in front of me that is my UCAN Hydrate. then I'm replacing with, it's just water and hydrate powder. And I am switching that up at every single aid station. So every time I get a chance, I'm getting a new bottle of water. I'm putting that in my front, in between my arms. I'm putting more hydrate in it, and that takes care of all of my electrolyte needs right there. That's really my source of hydration. And I really emphasize that and stress that, because where I went kind of wrong with UCAN in the beginning was that I was using that big 20-ounce bottle of UCAN or 24-ounce bottle of UCAN, or and I would carry 2 or 3 of the bottles, so I could do a packet in each bottle. I was using that as my source of hydration, and it just wouldn't go down as well when, to your point before, Varn, when I'm sipping on it throughout the day, it just doesn't seem to go down as well for me. So what I've turned to is the bottle up front in between my arms, and that's my only source of hydration. And then on the frame, I have gotten to where I'm riding with just one bottle, 20-ounce bottle with 3 packets of UCAN. So that's enough fuel for me for about 5 hours. That gets me through an entire Ironman. 20 ounces of liquid, 3 packets of worth of powder, or about 4 scoops if you're using the tub. And that's it. That's what I use for the entire Ironman bike ride. Now, just as since I'm being specific here, I will put another bottle with the same mix in special needs, just on the off chance that bumpy roads, the bottle ejects, I lose my nutrition, something like that. But knock on wood, since I started using UCAN, I've never had to touch a special needs bag. So my entire bike setup, all of my nutrition, all of my nutritional intake, my hydration comes from a bottle up front in between my arms that I refill with water, and then a bottle on my frame that's full with 4 servings worth of UCAN, and that's it. That's everything for the day.
Now, Greg, we have a lot of folks wondering, is there anything else that you need to supplement along with UCAN, in terms of other foods, other products? Do you find the need when you're on the bike, whether it's for hunger or towards the end of the run? Are you having anything else in conjunction with the UCAN?
Yeah. So when I started this, and I was really getting comfortable with how much UCAN I needed, how metabolically efficient I am, I would always carry kind of that backup just in case with me. And sometimes that was a UCAN snack bar, or it was even something, and this might be blasphemous given everything we just said, but for the sake of honesty here, I would carry something like a payday candy bar, something that was really simple sugar, just thinking, oh, what if I get into trouble and I need it? And what I found is it just made for a chocolatey mess in my pocket that I never actually used. So finally, when I was confident enough in my approach, I just stopped carrying anything else with me. So on the bike, I am just UCAN, just the protein powder in a bottle on the frame. On the run, I go a little bit more on feeling. So what I do for the run is I do a packet, which is about a serving and a half if you're using the tub, about a scoop and a half. I'll do 1 packet put into a small gel flask with about 4 ounces of water. So it makes a pretty concentrated, pasty solution, thinner than a gel, but thicker than just liquid. And as soon as I hit T2, right in the changing tent or next to the bike, wherever it is, I'll down that whole thing in just one big sip, toss the gel flask on the ground, and I'm good to go for at least half an Ironman, at least an hour and a half for me. Again, I'm always trying to run somewhere right around 3 hours for the Ironman marathon, and I find that shot of UCAN right at T2 is plenty to get me through either the entire half marathon or half of the Ironman marathon. Then at special needs for an Ironman, I'll pick up another gel flask filled again with 1 packet of UCAN, down that, and that usually is enough to get me through the end of the day. Now at a race like Eagleman, again, high dew point, high humidity, really high heat, what I found is that towards the end of the race, right around the 9-mile mark, I was trying to get onto the pro podium, trying to mow down a couple guys that were just a few minutes ahead of me, and my body was at that point very deep into the race with about a half hour to go, craving anything I could get my hands on. So at that point, I was adding in a little bit of very simple sugars like Coke that they hand out on the course. I probably had 2 or 3 cups of it. So, I mean, you can do the math. What is that in terms of calories? Maybe 50 calories, something like that. But just really to get that kind of quick burst of energy, knowing that I only had about 20 or 30 minutes left in the day. But that's it for a whole race. It's I'd say 95% just the either the thin gel-like consistency that I get from my gel flask on the run, or the liquid, the water mixed with UCAN that I get on the bike.
That's great, Greg. Appreciate that detailed look. I think that's really helpful for folks. So this is actually something that this graphic has really evolved based on Bob's recommendations for triathletes, and kind of works. We've seen this work across the board for most folks, but we're really recommending a serving of UCAN prior, and then kind of based on the intensity, based on the duration, and based on kind of your own energy needs, an additional serving every 60 to 90 minutes. Now, when we talk about a serving, generally speaking, it's between a scoop and a packet. So roughly, if you're using the UCAN without protein, about 80 to 120 calories. If you're using the UCAN with protein, it's somewhere in the range of about 120 to 180 calories. So this is what you're intaking as your fuel every 60 to 90 minutes. And this seems to work very well across the board for most folks. Now, again, like Greg talked about, when you're concentrating, several servings of UCAN in one bottle, really instead of sipping on it slowly over time, most people are finding success with kind of dosing with it, treating UCAN as a food in a way, and taking in that full serving. You don't have to chug it, but taking it over kind of the course of 10 minutes, and they're doing that every 60 to 90 minutes. So they're not sipping on it over that duration of time. They're kind of intaking it all at once. Remember, Greg's mixing it up pretty thick, so it's not like you're chugging a bunch of fluid to get a full serving in. You can really just get the serving of UCAN in your system quickly, and then kind of sip on your hydration, sip on your water, or sip on your water and electrolyte mix, as needed. In terms of other things that work well with UCAN, if you actually are feeling hungry, because UCAN from a carbohydrate standpoint is really for most people going to take care of your energy needs for the majority of the race. But if you're feeling hungry, look for things that don't spike blood sugar. So we're talking about, the squeezable almond butter packets. They work well. It's a source of protein and fat. If you can tolerate it, I know people that snack on nuts. A low sugar bar like the UCAN snack bar, that again is something that'll work well. You might want to try freezing it overnight. I know Greg's, racing in hot climates. The chocolate coating on the UCAN bar will melt a little bit. So you have to play around with that depending on the climate that you're in, and see if that's going to work for you. But from a nutrient standpoint and a blood sugar control standpoint, that's something, again, that's going to control hunger. So when you're thinking, again, of supplemental things with UCAN, don't think of it in terms of calories. Don't think of it and say, hey, UCAN's 110 calories. I need to be up to 250. So what else can I take to get me up to 250? The whole beauty of this metabolic efficiency is you're going much more based on feel, and so you're thinking of, okay, what can I snack on when I'm feeling hungry to help curb that hunger in my stomach? I'd say a big thing also to rely on is if you're starting out with UCAN, don't look at it and say 250, 300 calories an hour, 250 to 300 calories per hour is what I need. So let me take that much of UCAN. Trust me, you're not going to be happy if you're trying to suck down that much UCAN per hour. It's simply not necessary. And it's just not the way the product works, because it's just a very different type of carbohydrate because of the slow release. So really, I'd say a starting point for anybody that's new to this is a packet of UCAN, roughly 110, 120 calories every 60 to 90 minutes. And the most important, the most beneficial time, if you're going to use it once, is to use it as that pre-workout food about 30 minutes prior to your workout, 30 minutes prior to training. Greg, I guess when you talk about with the athletes you coach and you work with getting them started with UCAN, what have you found that's been a good way to ease people into it and to get them going with it, using it for the first time?
Yeah, so what I do, and what I did in the beginning, and what I encourage most of my athletes or first-time UCAN users to do, is have more in a bottle than you think you might need. So if I've got somebody going out for a 2.5 or 3 hour ride, and I know that I would get by on my metabolically efficient diet with just one packet, I'll tell them to put 2 or 3 in there, super concentrated, and again, do not use it for hydration, only for nutritional intake. And then just listen to the body. A big component that I think we didn't even discuss enough, Bob alluded to, though, with this idea of autopilot, is that when you really get in tune with your body and you know that you are metabolically efficient and you've got your hand models, your periodization plates, or your carb restriction and high-fat diets in place, you can really let your body's feeling dictate what you need. So in a half Ironman or in an Ironman or in a long training day, really, I'll make sure that I have enough nutrition in my bottle, but I won't hold myself to, I've got to drink every ounce of this bottle over the course of X number of hours. Instead, I'll just ride until I feel like, I'm a little bit hungry now. I'll take a big sip of that bottle, put it back. Maybe it's 20 minutes later, maybe it's an hour and 20 later, I go back to the bottle and I take another sip. And I find that's the best way. I never want somebody to be, to not have enough nutrition while they're out there on the bike or the run, because that leaves them with that feeling of, oh, this product doesn't work for me. So instead I'll say, put 2 packets in, put 3 packets in, and just sip on it when you feel like you need it. And they come back and say, hey, I only used half the bottle. This is great. And then, yeah, great, you just saved money, and you don't need to put as many packets in next time.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, that's all great stuff. So I think, kind of in summary, really, trying out UCAN, as that pre-workout snack prior to, an hour of training is a great way to start with. And then really what you're manipulating as you get into the longer workouts is how much of this do I actually need, and what's the best kind of timing to space it out. So Bob talked a lot about nutrient timing, and then that's something, again, with UCAN where it's going to take a little bit of experimentation because of the way that UCAN works, because it's a slower breakdown. When you're implementing it in training, and during your longer training, it's, with a gel, oftentimes when you feel low, you're going to take it and you're going to get, boom, that immediate sugar spike. And, it's kind of going to make you feel okay for 10 or 15 minutes before your blood sugar drops again. But with UCAN, you want to be a little bit ahead of it. So if that one serving that I took, pre-ride or pre-run is going to last me, 80 minutes or 100, or let's say 100 minutes, it's going to last me, an hour 40. Then in your mind, you're going to say, okay, I know I need to start getting in that next serving of UCAN about an hour and 20 in. So by the time I need it, the carbohydrate's already in me and it's started to break down. So that's where the experimentation comes in. And I heard somebody, I can't remember who said this, but somebody made a great point, kind of, UCAN on its own is really powerful, just because you always want to try to control your blood sugar. Metabolic efficiency on its own is extremely powerful as a way to control blood sugar. Both of them can work well on their own, and you can have good success in terms of lowering your calorie intake, reducing GI distress, controlling your blood sugar. They'll both help you do that. When you marry the two together, it's going to be amazing what you can do. Then you're going to start, seeing the type of success that Greg has seen, with using just such a minuscule 75 to 90 calories per hour, those types of results. But even for a lot of people, if you're not ready to dive fully into metabolic efficiency, like Bob talked about, you have to be willing to commit to this. If you're not willing to do that all the way, you can still find success utilizing UCAN and controlling your blood sugar and getting those calories down from 300 to 350 an hour. So we definitely encourage you to implement both, because from a health standpoint and from an efficacy standpoint, that's where you're going to really see some mind-blowing results. But there is an opportunity, to kind of come at it and utilize one or the other. I think Bob might have stuck around with us. I just noticed this right now. Bob, are you still there with us?
I sure am.
All right. Well, Bob, as we wrap this up, I want to give you the last word as kind of the guy at the forefront of all this. Anything that you just want to add in summary, whether it's about UCAN, whether it's about metabolic efficiency, that you really want people to leave this session with?
I think it's just important, and I think I reiterated it earlier, just when it comes to fueling your body from a food perspective, from a sport nutrition product perspective, know that your body can adapt very well and somewhat quickly, right? It takes a very open mind and understanding of how food works and how Generation UCAN works. It takes a very open mind to accept that. So what I would say is leave with, accept that the new paradigm of sport nutrition is here and it's not going anywhere. In fact, there's more and more articles and research being done on this. This really is the new wave of sport nutrition and how we work and fuel ourselves as endurance athletes. So keep an open mind and definitely keep all of your education coming. Read books, listen to webinars like you are. So definitely encourage you in promoting your continuing education also as an athlete.
Absolutely. And I know we have a lot of coaches on here as well, triathlon coaches. So for some of you that weren't familiar with this, hopefully this does make you say, huh? And, just as a follow-up, we will be sending a full recording of this session. I know we went long today. There was a lot to cover. So I'll kind of break it up for you guys on the metabolic efficiency side of things. and then the last 30 minutes we spent on the UCAN side of things, so you can digest it in pieces. But we will be sending out a full recording this afternoon. Also strongly encourage you to read Bob's book on metabolic efficiency training. I will be including a link to that in the follow-up email as well. If you really want to dive deeper into this, Bob's books have been great airplane reading for me, really a time when I'm able to focus and dive deep into the science. It's a fantastic read. So definitely have an opportunity for you folks to check that out as well. Bob and Greg, you guys are awesome. I learn something new every time I speak to you both, and really appreciate you hanging out. I know we went long, and I apologize for that, but really appreciate you guys sticking around and sharing your insights. So just want to thank you again.
Definitely. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Awesome, guys. For Bob Seebohar, for Greg Close, I'm Varun Sriram. Have a great afternoon.